The old wooden courtroom smelled faintly of dust and varnish, its creaking benches filled with curious spectators. At the center of it all stood Daniel Hayes, a decorated war veteran. His posture was upright, though his hands trembled slightly as he clutched the small velvet box containing his medals. He had come not for glory, but to defend his honor after being accused of falsifying his military record. Across the bench sat Judge Clarence Morton, a man infamous for his cold demeanor and disdain for those he considered beneath him. As Daniel presented his medals, Morton leaned forward, squinting at them with an exaggerated smirk. "Medals, you say?" The judge scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "They look like trinkets from a novelty shop. Tell me, Mr. Hayes, did you earn these on a battlefield, or order them online?" A ripple of uneasy laughter swept through the room. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he did not flinch. He had faced mortar fire and ambushes in foreign deserts. This humiliation was another kind of battlefield. His silence only fueled Morton's mockery. "Men like you disgust me," the judge continued, "always parading around, pretending to be heroes. Do you expect this court to believe such nonsense without proof?" Daniel raised his head, meeting the judge's cold gaze. "My proof," he said quietly, "is carved in the names of brothers I buried. You may mock me, Your Honor, but you cannot erase what we lived." The spectators shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, ashamed of the judge's cruelty. Just then the heavy courtroom doors swung open with a commanding thud. A tall man in a pressed uniform entered, his chest decorated with stars and ribbons. The room fell silent. The echo of polished boots striking the marble floor silenced the whispers instantly. Every eye turned toward the towering figure now standing in the doorway. His uniform alone commanded respect, gleaming with ribbons, stars, and a crisp badge of rank, General Marcus Ellison, a name recognized across the nation. Even Judge Morton, who had been grinning smugly a moment ago, shifted uneasily in his seat. His mocking expression faltered as the general's sharp gaze swept across the courtroom. "Proceed," Morton said, trying to regain control, but his voice wavered. The general stepped forward with a calm authority that filled the air. "Before you say another word, Judge," Ellison's voice boomed, "I need you to understand who stands before you." He gestured toward Daniel Hayes. "This man isn't a fraud. He's a soldier who bled for this country." Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel blinked in disbelief. He had never expected anyone, let alone a general, to walk through those doors. Morton coughed, straightening his robe. "General Ellison, this is a court of law. You can't simply barge in." "I can when justice is being mocked," the general interrupted, his tone razor-sharp. "I fought alongside men like Hayes. I've read his record. He served with distinction in 2 wars. Those medals you belittled? They were awarded after battles where most didn't make it home." Daniel's throat tightened. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen. The spectators leaned forward, whispers breaking out again. Some even applauded softly, quickly silenced by a bailiff. Judge Morton shifted in his chair, flustered. His authority was cracking. The smug confidence he once wielded slipped away like sand between his fingers. And Daniel knew the battle in this courtroom had only just begun. Judge Morton's face flushed crimson as the weight of the general's words settled over the courtroom. He straightened his robe, puffing out his chest in a last attempt to assert control. His gavel struck the block sharply. "This is highly irregular," Morton barked. "A courtroom is no parade ground. General Ellison, you may hold rank in the military, but here I preside. And I say these medals have yet to be proven authentic." The spectators shifted uncomfortably, torn between fear of the judge and awe of the general. Daniel remained silent, his weathered hands still clutching the medal case. His heart pounded, but his eyes stayed locked on Morton. Ellison stepped closer to the bench, his uniform catching the overhead light. "You mock what you don't understand, Judge," he said firmly. "Do you know what it costs to earn even one of these?" His voice softened, heavy with memory. Blood, sacrifice, nights without sleep, friends buried beneath flags. Morton scoffed, though his tone had lost its bite. "Emotional words don't change the fact that frauds exist. My duty is to ensure this court isn't deceived." "You speak of frauds," the general countered. "But what about integrity? What about honor? You ridicule a man who has stood in fire so that you could sit on that bench without fear." The tension crackled like a live wire. Some spectators nodded in agreement, others sat frozen. Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady though his hands trembled. "I don't need you to believe me, Judge. My conscience is clear, but I will not stand here while you spit on the memory of those who never came home." A hush fell. Even Morton hesitated. For the first time, the courtroom felt less like his domain, and more like a battlefield of truth. Judge Morton tapped his gavel again, harder this time, as if the sound could drown out the truth clawing at his authority. His eyes darted from Daniel to the general, then to the restless crowd. The room was no longer bending to his will. "This court will not be swayed by theatrics," Morton declared, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mr. Hayes still stands accused of falsifying his record, and until documentation proves otherwise, these medals remain suspect." General Ellison's jaw tightened. He reached into his briefcase and produced a folder stamped with military insignia. "I anticipated you might say that," he said, placing the folder deliberately on the clerk's desk. Inside are Daniel Hayes's official service records, signed and verified by the Department of Defense. Every medal, every deployment, every wound, documented. A murmur of astonishment rippled across the spectators. Morton's hand twitched, his composure cracking. He had not expected such a decisive move. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't known anyone had gone through the trouble of retrieving his records. His eyes burned with gratitude as he looked at Ellison. Morton cleared his throat, fumbling. "This is highly irregular procedure. Proper channels." "Proper channels?" the general cut in, his tone sharp. "Proper channels don't include mocking a veteran before evidence is even reviewed." The judge froze, gavel poised in mid-air. The spectators, sensing his unraveling, whispered louder. Some even shot angry glances toward him. For the first time in his long career, Judge Morton felt the authority of his bench slipping. The gavel in his hand seemed suddenly small, a mere piece of wood against the weight of truth standing before him. And Daniel realized the tide was beginning to turn. The air grew heavy, each second stretched by the silence that followed General Ellison's words. The clerk hesitated, then opened the folder. The rustle of papers was loud in the tense room. Rows of neatly typed service records, stamped and signed, glared back with undeniable authenticity. Gasps filled the gallery. A woman in the back whispered, "It's all real," while a man near the aisle muttered, "The judge went too far this time." Morton's jaw clenched. "Silence in my court," he snapped, slamming the gavel. But his command carried little weight. His authority had fractured, and everyone could feel it. Daniel exhaled slowly, shoulders loosening for the first time that day. Still, his voice carried the steadiness of a soldier. "I didn't come here for pity. I came because someone accused me of lying. These medals were given to me, not for myself, but for the sacrifices of the men I led. They belong to their memory." The words struck harder than any evidence. A few spectators lowered their heads, some with tears in their eyes. Ellison stepped forward, his tone unwavering. "Judge Morton, this man deserves respect, not ridicule. Your conduct here dishonors not only Hayes, but every soldier who has ever served." Morton's face flushed red. His robe suddenly felt heavier, as though it carried the judgment of the entire room. "This is my courtroom," he said, his voice trembling, "and I will not be lectured on respect." But the people no longer sat quietly. Applause broke out from one corner of the gallery, spreading like fire despite the bailiff's attempts to silence it. For the first time, Daniel wasn't alone. The courtroom was no longer just a stage for humiliation, it was becoming a battlefield of truth, with the crowd itself shifting to his side. The judge's gavel thundered against the block, but it could not silence the applause swelling through the room. His eyes darted nervously, the authority he once commanded slipping through his grasp. General Ellison raised a hand, and the room quieted with surprising obedience. He turned toward the benches. "If proof is still questioned, let us hear from the man himself." His eyes met Daniel's. "Sergeant Hayes, tell them what those medals mean." Daniel hesitated. He wasn't one to speak of his past. He carried his memories like scars, silent and unspoken. But the weight of the moment pressed on him. Slowly he stepped forward. His voice was low at first. That bronze star was for holding a position when everything around us fell apart. We were outnumbered, outgunned. I watched men I'd trained with, men I called brothers, fall one by one. but we held the line so others could make it home. The room stilled. Not even the judge moved. Daniel swallowed, continuing. The Purple Heart came after an IED blast. I woke up under rubble, bleeding, couldn't hear in one ear. But I crawled out because others couldn't. I carried 3 of them to safety before I collapsed. His hands shook, but his eyes were steady. These medals aren't decorations. They're reminders. Reminders of what it cost. Reminders of who didn't come back. Sniffles echoed from the gallery. A veteran in the back stood silently, hand pressed over his heart. Another rose, saluting Daniel without a word. One by one, more veterans in the courtroom followed. Morton's face paled as the tide of respect swelled. For every salute, his gavel seemed weaker. Daniel had never asked for honor, but in that moment, the courtroom gave it freely. The courtroom had shifted. Where once Judge Morton's voice dominated, now silence and respect ruled, anchored by Daniel's testimony and the veterans standing tall. The judge's gavel hung uselessly in his hand, his eyes darting nervously between the saluting men and the spectators' hardened stares. General Ellison stepped closer, his boots striking the marble with deliberate weight. He faced the bench squarely, his tone sharp and unyielding. Judge Morton, this has gone beyond a trial. It has become a spectacle of disrespect toward a man who bled for this nation. I will not allow it to continue. Morton bristled. General, you may intimidate soldiers, but not me. This is still my courtroom. Ellison's voice dropped lower, colder. No, Judge, this is America's courtroom. And in America, we honor sacrifice. If you persist in mocking a veteran under oath, then you not only dishonor this court, you risk an official inquiry into your conduct. Gasps echoed. A few spectators whispered. An inquiry? Morton's face drained of color. You can't threaten me, Morton stammered, though his voice betrayed his fear. It's not a threat, Ellison replied evenly. It's a promise. I will personally file a complaint with the Judicial Review Committee, and I will bring witnesses. Every veteran here will testify how you spat on their service through Daniel Hayes. The veterans saluting nodded, murmurs of agreement filling the air. The atmosphere felt electric, charged with righteous anger. Morton gripped his gavel tightly, but his hand trembled. His robe, once a symbol of power, now seemed like a shroud. For the first time in his career, Judge Clarence Morton realized he had gone too far. He had underestimated the weight of honor and the men who carried it. The silence inside the courtroom grew unbearable, pressing down on every soul present. Judge Morton's lips tightened into a thin line as he scanned the gallery. The saluting veterans, the tearful spectators, and the unyielding glare of General Ellison left him cornered. Daniel remained at the witness stand, shoulders squared. He hadn't asked for this fight, yet it had found him. He looked at Morton calmly, without anger, his eyes reflecting a quiet strength. Morton cleared his throat, desperate to regain composure. This court must proceed with evidence, not emotion, he muttered, but the words rang hollow, even to his own ears. Ellison stepped forward, voice steady. Then let's speak of evidence. You have his verified service record, stamped by the Department of Defense. You have sworn testimony, and you have the acknowledgement of men who served. What more could you possibly require? The judge faltered. His fingers tightened around the gavel, but the weight of his robe seemed heavier by the second. He tried to respond, but the gallery erupted before he could. Show respect, a voice called. He's a hero, shouted another. Applause thundered once again, louder than before. The bailiffs moved to quiet the room, but even they seemed hesitant, casting Daniel respectful glances. Morton slammed his gavel, but it cracked against the block, the sound sharp and splintering. A jagged line split down its wooden head. The room gasped at the symbolic fracture. Daniel lifted his chin. You can doubt me, Your Honor, but you cannot erase what happened. The truth doesn't need your approval to exist. Morton's hand froze mid-air. His authority was breaking, just like the gavel in his grip, and for the first time the judge realized the verdict was no longer his to control. The crack in the gavel lingered in the air like thunder after lightning. Judge Morton's hand shook as he set the splintered piece of wood down. For a man who had built his career on control, the symbol of his power breaking felt like an omen. General Ellison seized the moment. He faced the gallery, his commanding voice filling the room. Every soldier who serves does so knowing they may never return. And when they do, battered and scarred, they deserve honor, not ridicule. His gaze then pierced Morton. What does it say about a judge who mocks sacrifice? The spectators erupted again, cheers, clapping, even a few angry shouts directed at the bench. Morton's face turned ashen. He hammered the broken gavel weakly, but each strike sounded more pathetic than the last. A young lawyer rose from the gallery holding a folder. "Your Honor, I represent the Veterans Advocacy League. We've documented complaints of your bias against service members before. If necessary, we'll add today to the file." Morton's eyes widened. "Complaints?" he stammered. "Yes," the lawyer replied firmly. "Several. You've dismissed veterans' cases, denied disability appeals, and belittled decorated men. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern." The room gasped. Daniel's heart pounded as truth began to surface. He glanced at Ellison, who gave a small nod, as if everything was unfolding exactly as he had anticipated. Morton sank into his chair, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "This is outrageous," he muttered. I am the law here." Ellison leaned closer, his tone like steel. "No, Judge. You are a servant of the law. And today the law and the people are watching." The gallery roared with approval. Morton's power was slipping faster than he could grasp. And Daniel realized justice was finally catching up. The courtroom no longer belonged to Judge Morton. The murmurs of the gallery carried more weight than his robe, and every eye lingered on Daniel Hayes. For the first time, Daniel felt the silence waiting for him, not for Ellison, not for the lawyers, but for him. Slowly, Daniel rose. His voice was steady, though heavy with emotion. "I didn't come here to make a scene. I didn't ask for a general to defend me, or for veterans to salute me. I came because someone claimed I was a liar." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "But let me make one thing clear. These medals aren't just mine. They belong to men who never came back, men who'll never hold their children again, men who gave everything." His words carried like stone across still water. Even Morton, trembling at his bench, looked away. Daniel continued, softer now. "I wake up every night remembering faces, names. The battlefield doesn't leave you, Your Honor. It lives in you. And when you mock these medals, you mock the graves of the ones I buried. That I cannot forgive." Tears shimmered in the eyes of spectators. The veterans remained standing, their silent salute unwavering. General Ellison placed a firm hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Well said, Sergeant. You've carried enough. Let the truth carry the rest." Morton's gavel slipped from his grasp, clattering uselessly against the floor. His authority shattered with it. The gallery erupted, not in chaos but in a wave of respect. Applause thundered through the room, echoing like a victory long overdue. Daniel stood tall, chest rising with a deep breath. For the first time, he felt the courtroom was not a place of judgment, but of justice. And in that moment, the veteran had finally won his war. The applause rolled on like a storm, rattling the walls of the old courthouse. Judge Morton sat frozen, pale and sweating, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. He had spent years wielding the gavel like a weapon, silencing voices with authority. Now, no one listened. A bailiff leaned toward him, whispering urgently, "Sir, the gallery is out of control." Morton shook his head, his voice low and broken. "No, it's me who's lost control." General Ellison stepped forward again, his tone crisp. "Judge Morton, you mocked a decorated veteran without cause. You ignored verified records, and now evidence of your bias has been presented. The people see it. The law will see it." The young lawyer from the Veterans Advocacy League added firmly, "We'll be filing an official complaint today. Every word of this proceeding is on record." Morton's chest heaved. He looked down at his desk, at the broken gavel lying useless beside the folder of Daniel's service record. His lips trembled. You can't ruin me like this." Daniel's voice rang clear, not cruel but resolute. "I didn't ruin you, Judge. You did that yourself the moment you mocked the dead." The gallery hushed, the words striking harder than any outburst. Morton's eyes darted desperately to the veterans still saluting, to Ellison's unwavering stance, to the crowd's burning stares. His fortress of authority had crumbled into sand. For the first time, he looked small, just a man stripped of power. Ellison spoke coldly. "Your Honor, I advise you to choose your next words carefully. They may be your last as a sitting judge." The silence that followed was suffocating. Everyone leaned forward, waiting to see whether Morton would cling to pride or surrender to truth. Judge Morton's hands trembled as he rose from his bench. His once commanding robe now seemed like a burden, draped over a man hollowed by fear. The gallery watched in rapt silence, the weight of his downfall hanging in the air. I never meant disrespect," Morton stammered, his voice thin. "I only sought to ensure no falsehood tainted this court." Ellison's eyes narrowed. "Call it what it was, Judge. Mockery. You belittled sacrifice to inflate your pride." Morton opened his mouth, but no words came. The evidence, the witnesses, the sheer presence of Daniel Hayes and the veterans stood as an unshakable wall against him. His gavel lay broken, the courtroom no longer his domain. The young lawyer stepped forward, voice steady. "Your Honor, under the Code of Judicial Conduct, your behavior today constitutes gross misconduct. This proceeding itself is grounds for suspension." The spectators erupted in murmurs of agreement. A few shouted, "Step down!" Others cried, "Resign!" Morton's eyes darted desperately, but there was no ally left in the room. Even the bailiffs avoided his gaze. Finally, his shoulders slumped. "Perhaps," he whispered, voice breaking, "perhaps I should recuse myself from this case." The gallery cheered, the sound reverberating like thunder. Veterans saluted once more, this time not just for Daniel, but for the justice they had witnessed. Daniel stood still, his expression calm. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He only nodded, acknowledging the moment. "It was never about me, Judge. It was about the men who can't be here to defend themselves." Ellison's voice cut through the cheers. "Then let their honor stand, and let this court remember it." Morton sank into his chair, defeated, the echo of his downfall sealing the day's verdict. The courtroom was no longer Morton's stage. The crowd's applause echoed through the chamber, mingling with the solemn silence of veterans standing tall. Judge Morton slumped in his chair, stripped of pride, his robe little more than fabric hiding a broken man. General Ellison stepped forward, his boots clicking firmly against the floor. When he spoke, his voice carried more weight than the gavel ever had. "This proceeding will be remembered," he declared, turning not just to the bench but to the gallery. "Because today, a man who gave his blood for this nation was mocked, and today, the people stood with him." The room answered with cheers and nods of agreement. Morton lowered his head, shame painted across his face. Daniel shifted, his voice calm and resolute. "I didn't ask for this. All I wanted was the truth to stand on its own." Ellison nodded. "And it did. Your service needs no defense, Sergeant. The medals on your chest speak louder than any judge's words." The young lawyer from the Veterans Advocacy League stepped beside Daniel. "We'll see that the misconduct here is reviewed. You won't stand alone again." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes, though he quickly blinked them away. For years he had carried the weight of silence. Now that silence had been broken by truth and honor. Ellison turned one last time toward Morton, his tone sharp. "Your days of mocking service members are finished. When a man sacrifices for this country, he deserves more than your contempt. He deserves respect." Morton said nothing. The silence was louder than any protest he could have made. The gallery erupted into applause once more, rising to its feet. In that moment, Daniel felt lighter, as if the battlefield he carried had finally been acknowledged. The gavel lay broken. The judge slumped in silence, and the courtroom buzzed with a sense of justice long denied. For Daniel Hayes, the moment felt unreal, like a weight lifted from his chest after years of carrying it alone. General Ellison stood beside him, the very image of authority and respect. "Sergeant," he said firmly, "you've carried your brother's memories with honor. Today you reminded this court and this country that sacrifice cannot be mocked." Daniel swallowed hard, his voice trembling but steady. "I only ever wanted their names to live on. That's all any of us want. Not glory, not recognition, just remembrance." The gallery, moved by his humility, rose to its feet. Veterans saluted once more, civilians clapped, and tears glistened on many faces. Even the bailiffs, once stern and detached, stood straighter, their expressions softened with respect. Judge Morton sat hunched over, defeated. His arrogance had crumbled under the weight of truth. The young lawyer announced confidently, "This transcript will be filed. Justice will follow." The words sealed Morton's fate. His career would not survive the shame. Daniel turned to leave, medal case in hand. But before stepping out, he paused, looking back at the courtroom that had once threatened to break him. Now it felt different, not hostile, but reverent. Ellison placed a hand on his shoulder. "You fought for them once, Sergeant. Today you fought again, and won." As Daniel exited the courthouse, the crowd outside erupted into cheers. Reporters snapped photos, but Daniel ignored them. He looked up at the sky, a quiet prayer on his lips for the brothers he'd lost. For the first time in years, he felt peace. The war inside him had finally been acknowledged, and his honor, their honor, was restored. And in that victory, justice had truly